Alright everybody, so here we go with homework 2. So this one's kind of similar to what we did last time, but instead of bringing in the two different inputs and adding them together for our output line, we're going to bring them in and then we're going to compare them. So we're still doing function calls like we have in the past. We're still passing and returning variables, and we're operating within our functions. But this time we're actually going to throw some of the if statements in there. Now we went over ifs, I believe, 2 weeks ago now, so I'll have some examples for you. But I want to show you how this is actually going to operate. So now everybody has, as you can see down here at the bottom, their own tab within the sheet. Okay? So I want everybody to see, for example, row 15. The first one is 9. The second one is also 9. Okay? So what I should expect is the first one is going to tell me that they're equal. And then it's going to work its way down just like we did today during class. So we're going to increase the row counter by 1 every time we run this loop. So I'm going to go ahead and execute, and I want to make sure that everybody names their files the same. So for this one, I want to save this as GSheets homework 2, just like I have it here. Make sure you follow directions properly, okay? I'm going to execute this Python script just as we're used to here with the GSheets using that library. We have to use the Python, not Python 3. So here we go with Python GSheets homework 2.py. So it should take in those two different inputs and it's printing to the screen. Okay, now you can see it jumped up a little bit as it processed everything and then ran it here on our screen. So it is printing out RI on every line. If you want to add something on your printout, you're certainly welcome to do that, but at the minimum, I want to have a printout of the I so you can see it as it loops through. So we have 0 because that's what we initiate I as, and the last one is 9 because that is the last row we're going through as we're going through these 10 rows. So you can look now back on the spreadsheet, for example, see like I had mentioned on row 15, 9 is equal to 9, so it says equal. Okay, 2 is less than 45, so it says less than. So it's going to increment all the way down just like we're used to, like we did earlier today in class, and as opposed to adding them together, it's just going to compare them as it increments down. So let's come back here and bring up the code. Okay, so a big piece of this for you guys this time, notice I changed the actual worksheet. Okay, so if we go back and look at that there at the bottom, everybody has their own worksheet now. We have the Eli, the Ethan, etc., etc. Everybody has their own worksheet. Make sure you're using your worksheet. Once you choose your worksheet by filling that out here, for example, if I was going to do Eli, I'm just going to type ELI. That's going to choose the Eli worksheet. Okay? Now, let's review a little bit on how this is going to operate. The way this is going to run, like we know before, is when the program launches, since we're not calling these functions right off the bat, it's skipping through all these different functions, okay? The first thing it's going to do after we determine what sheet we're going to be referencing, so again, going back to this, our sheet that we're referencing once we name it is my sheet. So for Elijah, for example, you're going to be hitting the coach test, that's the spreadsheet name, and the specific sheet is Eli. So now that's going to equal your my sheet here, okay? So as I talked about earlier, I'm starting or initializing your I as 0, and we're going to do a loop while I is less than 10, this loop will continue. Since we saw earlier, and I'll just minimize this real quick, see how we start with row 15? That's why I have row equals 15 right here at the beginning. Also to note, here at the bottom of our loop is where we have the incremental of your variable. So make sure you increment I and increment row by 1 at the bottom of the loop. Okay? So the first thing I had mentioned is make sure you're printing I every time you run through this loop. Now we're going to take the two different inputs. So we have input 1 equals our function call, read column A, passing row. So let's review this again. I know we talked about this in class today, but we're looking at here, we've got input 1, so we're naming this variable, and then we're doing the function call of read column A. and then we're passing our variable that we now have established here as a global variable as row 15, okay? So again, to reference this, remember this is our variable that's going to be actually getting the value from the function of read column A, and that's what's going to be returned, okay? So let's jump up to read column A. Read column A, and I have this code here so you guys can look at this. The input 1 equals int for your integer of my sheet, that's your reference back to the actual sheet, dot get, so you're getting this value from A, which is our column, and then we're adding the string conversion of row. So we have row, which is our integer, but we're passing up through our GSheets library this particular string. Well, we did this in class, so you should know how that works. So we're turning this integer into a string and passing it along with A. So for example, our very first thing we're passing is going to be A15. So we're getting whatever the value of A15 is first. We are putting that as input 1, and then here at the end of read column A function, we're returning input 1. Okay, and we see that equaling the same thing down here. Now the same thing is going to happen with input 2. We're coming up and hitting the read column B. Okay, so we see this input 2 variable equals my read column B function call, as we see here. And then we're passing this integer variable of row that we have established here as global again back up to read column B. So here's your read column B. Now I'm not going to expand this because I want you guys to work through this on your own. A little bit of this homework part is not just going to be copy paste. I want you to do some critical thinking, compare what read column A is in comparison to what read column B should be. Okay. Now the next piece, we're coming down here to our compare. Okay. So compare is another variable that we are establishing. Then we're going to do our compare 1 function call. And then we're going to send it our first variable of input 1 along with our second variable of input 2. Now keep in mind, because we had this question and issue sometimes during our class today, this is a comma, this is not a period. When you separate the two different variables, when you're sending and or receiving these variables in these function calls or function declarations, they need to be separated by a comma. Okay, so let's go up to the compare function. I've expanded this so we can see some of it, how it goes. So again, same thing, compare 1. We are accepting input 1, comma, input 2. Make sure we have our full colon. And then I have the notes here, so I want to make sure you guys have notes, document in your code like we've talked about many times in the past. Then we have some if statements, okay? So the very first one is if input 1 is less than input 2, what do? What we're going to do is now input 1 is less than input 2, then compare equals less than. Okay, so this is actually making a variable string of the words less than, and that's what compare is now going to equal. Okay, now you can see that I have not finished the if statement for the second one here. If input 1 is greater than input 2, then you have to fill this in on your homework. Compare our variable equals what? Make sure you're doing it as a string in quotations, just like I have here. Okay, and the next one is going to be what's going to happen if it's equal. And I have these comments here so you can read this. Set one more statement. Now that says in, should say if. One more if statement to see if the two are equal. Remember, if statements for equal would be if input 1 equal input 2. Make sure and remember to notice here that equal. Some of you may forget, and I know we've had issues with that in the past when we do our if statements. If we're trying to compare two different things, make sure we have that double equals there. Okay, now here at the end, what we're doing is returning from that function our variable that's been declared based on whatever we determine here in our if statements, this variable string of compare. So we come back, compare is here. Now we do a function call. Notice there's no equal sign here. We had some of those issues in class. So since this is just a function call and we're not taking anything back from it, we're just doing a function call of output 1. We're sending it our variable, that's a string of compare, comma, our variable, that is an integer of row. Notice our global here, it's row. Coming up to output 1, compare, comma, row. Now you should be able to keep track of what is necessary there based on writing to a cell based on what we learned today in class. If you do not recall, go back to your other programs and fill that in. But notice that since we're pulling in from your individualized sheets, we are inputting on A, we're inputting B, and you're going to output to column C. Make sure you're outputting to column C, and then you're going to be outputting in that column if they are less than or equal to, if they are greater than, or if they are equal. Okay? That should be basically all there is to it. If anybody has questions, feel free to send me a message, and hopefully we will make this happen. All right, guys, have fun. Enjoy.